Howdy, folks. Welcome back. I am Ross Weaver, here to do some more Metal Gear Solid V Explained lectures. I've got a few more that I want to add on to this series, and there's only like a few little things to talk about kind of outside of the main game events that I've already talked about that kind of need to be gone over, but like I said, they don't really tie in with any of the direct stuff you do in the story, so they need to kind of be left on their own to be covered separately, and that's what I'll be doing in these few little extra lectures at the end. I've got 5 more planned at the moment. There might be another 1 or 2 added to that by the time I get done with it all. But these will just kind of be little extra lectures that'll kind of cover some other little details and kind of point out some other little, I guess you could call them hints as to the existence of all of this crazy stuff that I've been going over. This lecture is going to be on the architecture of Mother Base, primarily. But before I get to that, I want to talk about just some stuff that's happened in the past few months since I finished that last lecture, and kind of what I've been doing in my future plans and stuff like that. So if you're bored by all that stuff and you don't really care, you can skip ahead to where I start the lecture. But so what's been going on in these past few months is I've been looking into other games, stories, in this kind of way that this method or methodology that I've kind of taken to Metal Gear, I'm taking it to other game series. The first one I took it to was Kojima Productions' latest video game, Cyberpunk 2077. And yes, they are co-credited in 2077. In the base game, when you beat it, in the long credits, there's like a whole section for Kojima Productions, and a bunch of their personnel are listed. And of course, Kojima has you could say a cameo in the game. And I could almost do like a whole nother lecture series on that game and its parallels to just to Metal Gear. And really, it's just specifically 2077. The Cyberpunk series goes back way further. And on that note, Cyberpunk itself was probably one of the original inspirations in the whole mix of the original Metal Gear games and Metal Gear Solid. I don't know Kojima's history with Mike Pondsmith and the Cyberpunk guys and gals over there with that whole operation, but I'd wager a guess that they're at least acquainted. After playing through 2077 again with all of this stuff in mind, I was just like, okay, yeah, the Kojima stuff is there, and so I took it a little further, and went to Fallout 4. Fallout 4 is a game I played back in 2016 and maybe a little bit in 2017, back when it came out, and I liked it a lot. It was my first Fallout game. Everybody thinks that Fallout 3 and 4 are kind of terrible, and New Vegas is great. And with 4 being my first one, I kind of don't share that view because I never played the first 2 games. I see now that Fallout 3 and 4 are not exactly the best Fallout games, but they're still fun for what they are, and just because Fallout has kind of changed a little bit and the whole, war's changed thing. I don't know. Anyways, Fallout 4's story, kind of like 2077, it's very self-referential, like the Phantom Pain. There's a lot of little story snippets in Fallout 4 that you'll find that are pretty much copied straight from either New Vegas or Fallout 3 or even Fallout 1 or 2. And it's not just like they just straight up copied it. It's like they kind of took the same story stuff and changed it a little bit so you don't really know it's the same thing. But if you pay attention, it's all there. So I went back over Fallout 4 and Cyberpunk 2077 and saw they had a lot of self-referential stuff going on. So the stuff in the Phantom Pain being kind of self-referential to this kind of gap between the Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes, kind of starting at Ground Zeroes, really. It's not that unprecedented as it turns out. It's a pretty common thing that happens a lot nowadays in, you'd say, wider franchises that have existing materials that are making new entries. That's probably a thing a lot of old, movie sequels and stuff have done too. Die Hard 2 is basically a replay, a self-consciously made replay of the Die Hard 1 scenario with just a few things kind of added and changed up to make it more interesting, So it's an old method, as it turns out. So that's what I've been doing with most of my time. If you saw the hours I put into Fallout 4 right now, you'd probably gawk. Anyways, I'm maybe blushing right now. Another thing I've been doing is planning the next proper video essay. You would say that I'm going to release. Those 5 videos I released. I'm calling the Fox Alive cluster. I'm not gonna leave those to be just what they are. There's more stuff that I didn't reveal in those videos on purpose, and kind of talked about a lot of that stuff I didn't reveal in the lecture series, because that was the point, was to kind of leave it to be more of a detailed, subtle explanation. Some of this stuff you can't really just put in a theory video and just like say it without fully going into the whole implications and the whole web of things that comes out of it. So that was why I did all that in the lecture series. But there's still more big stuff that I haven't really gone over just in general, and it's outside of the purview of really the Phantom Pain and MGSV as a whole. It's stuff that you kind of get from it, but it's really story that was planted or seeded, you would say, back in 99, 98, when they made Metal Gear Solid, and they kind of continued that planting, the row of it, I guess you would say, into Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. So it was a big secret story that's embedded into these games that I'm going to go into with this next video. It's going to be titled You Don't Know Jack, or You Don't Know Jack About Metal Gear. And that's my big next video coming, and there'll be more after that one too, but I'm taking it kind of slow on these, as you can tell, with these lectures coming out so spaced out. That first grouping came out really quick, but I've taken a little time, and that's because I feel like this stuff is not something you can just get to quickly and easily and get everything. You gotta take your time with it and kind of sleep on it quite a bit before all the answers can really come to you, and even then you can't really be sure. So another thing I wanted to talk about just briefly, just so I say it somewhere. I'm recording this right after the Game Awards, not right after, a few days after. It's Sunday, and the Game Awards were on Thursday. So OD is a thing now, and it's Kojima's new Xbox game, and people are speculating wildly already and talking about it like crazy. They're already finding some crazy stuff about it. I don't want to share too many of my thoughts about it yet here, because this is not the right place or time, but I've got a lot of ideas about OD and what it's going to be, and a lot of these ideas are not being circulated out there right now, so that's why I'm kind of like, maybe I'll wait and see what people come to themselves, and then I'll say what I have to say about it at a later time. But I wrote down here as the last little thing, OD, obviously, in the way he presented it, is some kind of a lot further elaboration on the PT formula, or some kind of, you could say, follow-up to the ideas in PT. Maybe not necessarily a sequel to PT, but there's obviously links to PT that he's wanting to make there. And PT, I've always said, is more linked to Metal Gear Solid than it is to Silent Hill. And I think if you go back over PT and look at it, you'll see that there's nothing really linking it explicitly to the Silent Hill franchise or any of that series lore. The whole Silent Hills screen was one screen that comes up in order to make you think that this is a Silent Hill game, and then the next screen that comes up later is this game is a teaser. It has no direct connection to the main title. So the main title was Silent Hills, so it has no connection to Silent Hills. And that's a thing that Kojima said before, actually, that there's no connection. People have talked to him in regards to Zone of the Enders, wondering if Zone of the Enders is like somehow connected to the Metal Gear Solid universe, and like maybe Zone of the Enders is the future of Metal Gear. And he's multiple times thoroughly said that they're not connected, and that Zone of the Enders is its own universe. I think you could think of PT as not connected to Silent Hill in the same way that people kind of want to connect Metal Gear and Zone of the Enders. People want to connect PT and Silent Hill, but you really shouldn't. And there's a lot of thematic reasons, even like going beyond just like the actual narrative, why that's the case. But it's not what this lecture is about, so I'm not going to go into it anymore here. Yeah, I'll have more to say about OD later though, at some point. So let's get on with it. Lecture 24 is what this one's going to be, on the architecture of Mother Base. This one's going to be some recaps of some stuff we've already gone over in the main lecture, but I'm going to like condense it all here in one place, so that if you want to see it talked about and not have to go search through all the lectures, this will be the place to go to talk about, or to see me talk about all of the parallels between the Afghanistan kind of terrain and geography, and how that relates all back to Mother Base, and how you can draw parallels between specific locations and things like that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about just some other stuff on Mother Base. So let's get into it. The Afghanistan parallels are it's the really important thing to understand from this lecture. So that's what we're going to go into first. I'll just go through them one at a time and just kind of cover what all of the different things are. I'll list them all here real quick, and then we'll go through them one by one. There's the command strut, your main central one, which is Wialo Kallei. There's the combat strut, which is Wakh Barracks. There's the base dev strut, which is equivalent to Ghwandei. There's the intel strut, which is equivalent to the Eastern Comms Post. The medical platform is equivalent to Lamar Khaate Palace. The support strut is equivalent to Yakhoo Oboo supply outpost. The R&D strut is equivalent to Shago village. Excuse me. And the quarantine platform is equivalent to Spugmay keep. Now, I've got some extra identifiers that kind of go with each one of these pairs, and then I'll talk a little bit about each one. So, going back to the first one, the command strut is Wialo Kallei, and it's kind of like Tower 1. It's like the main tower. You remember, if you played Peace Walker, the command structure on MSF's base was a large singular tower. And the tower narrative I've gone over with the Skullface stuff and Huey being taken from the tower and all that. That's kind of one possible location for all of that narrative. This is essentially Tower 1 is really what it is. And to talk about it with the other tower, Tower 2 is really the combat structure. It looks the same, and it's another tower structure. And it's the Wakh Barracks and Wialo Kallei are kind of all, you could say, one continuous kind of zone in that whole map. It's not really majorly broken up by the geography. There's kind of nice flowing area between all the places, and it's like, Wialo Kallei is sort of like the southern part. It's the fortified village, and Wakh Barracks up to the north is like a fortified hillside, right? And so these two places are where, we hear that Skullface went and got Huey from the tower. And it's also, when we see the Ground Zeroes, the video of the post-mission stuff, there are two big towers that fall. And it's not the strut we go to, though. There's not really a tower on that strut that Snake ends up landing on. That strut that Snake ends up landing on is more equivalent to the base dev platform, which we'll get to here in a second. But it kind of implies that Tower 1 and Tower 2 were taken down before Snake even got back. Now, let's just go on to the base dev platform. It's Ghwandei. And I've kind of written down, it's also got a kind of tower context, but it's really got more of a boxes context. It's kind of, if you think about the base dev on the FOB mode when you're invading it, that's where most of the materials are stored. So there's a lot of boxes there. And the whole area is kind of like, it's very boxy in terms of like, there's a box that has a ramp going up to it, and then another ramp going up to a bigger box, in kind of a way you can look at it, with another bigger box on top of that ramp. It's like a big series of boxes that kind of design that whole base dev platform to be very boxy. And if you go to Ghwandei, it's with all of the houses like they are, it's very boxy. And at this point, I wanted to note, Ghwandei, doesn't really look like the base dev platform, because Ghwandei is built on a hillside. It's got this kind of slanted thing going on. Well, if you go back to, like I was saying, the video we see of Ground Zeroes, and if we are landing on the base dev platform, well, what happens to that platform after Snake takes off is it splits in half, and it falls into the ocean. And that's kind of the last we see of it. So imagine if it had split in half and just not fallen into the ocean. Say if it was over the land, it would have split in half and then just been kind of on its side with all these boxes on it. That's kind of Ghwandei. It's like a ruined version of our base that's been kind of split in half and just left there. And they've kind of rebuilt these little boxy things on top of it, but you can tell it's not really a one-to-one thing. There's like this kind of change between Ghwandei and our base dev platform, which kind of implies this story. Um, and it's like I said, it's a story you've already seen. So moving on, we know the Intel platform. I've talked about it at length. Is the Eastern Communications Post, and the kind of signifier for it that I wrote down is head. Actually, it's a heady place. The Intel platform, if you go look at it, it's a big old round ball that's kind of looks like the Epcot Center ball, like a golf ball or something, but it's shaped in that way, I suspect, for some kind of like, communications protection, from spying from, external stuff and things like that. It's some kind of insulation or something like that, probably on a practical level. But it kind of looks like a head in a box because the whole platform is actually, it's boxy shaped and the sphere is inside the box. And you never really get to go inside the sphere, inside the game. But you could think of the Intel platform as kind of like the Eastern Comms Post. And if this is the head place, you can also kind of liken it to Sorok Power Plant with its cells and the cave. And the cave being kind of like inside Chico's head. You can kind of put all those things together there, and you get a fairly complete picture. The head in the box thing is also a Seven reference. The movie, obviously, it was a woman's head in the box in that film, but spoilers if you haven't seen it. And it honestly, I think, oh gosh, I don't want to go into it here. I don't like that movie very much. Anyways, but yeah, I've talked about how the Intel platform deals with a lot of communications stuff, and the Eastern Communications Post obviously is it's got communications in the name. And how I also linked those to the Devil's House, and Survive itself kind of links them with superimposing the Intel platform on the Eastern Comms Post, or on the Devil's House in the FOB map. And like I said, how there's kind of this story implied there back in my lectures, how the way the Man on Fire bends down to choke you and then stops, and at that moment Shabani dies. It kind of all tells the story that Big Boss Naked Snake bent down and throttled Chico, probably snapped his neck, and then probably decapitated him. And yeah, so head context there. Let's see, what's next is the medical platform. And the medical platform is an interesting one. I kind of liken it to the quarantine platform, which we'll get to in a little bit. And of course, the medical platform is like Lamar Khaate Palace. I wrote down Delta as kind of the signifier for this one, because it's just a big flat area with the cell in the middle, and then the building itself is just a triangle. It's just triangular shaped if you look at it on the map. And triangles, like I said, they kind of indicate delta in written contexts. So you could think of medical as kind of like it's a place of change. And that makes sense with all of the pause cutscenes being there, and with the realization that Venom Snake has there, and that you, the player, should hopefully have there after you watch all of those cutscenes with the fake pause and the hallucinations and all of that. And I know I haven't covered those in these lectures, but I feel like those are covered pretty well in my other videos. So if you want to know more about those, you can go back there. But basically, pause is like a self-made hallucination. Pause is sort of like, it's kind of like, it is Chico in a way. It's like Chico's inner child, but it's a little bit like his anima, I think is what it is for a man, or animus maybe. I always get those two terms mixed up. But it's like your inner self, the sort of dark side of your inner self, which is a gender swapped version of you, kind of, as far as psychology goes. That's kind of what's going on with the medical platform. That's why Quiet is there in the cell. And it's kind of implied in the game that Chico was, held in this cell in the past, and in the cell behind him, which is in the big building, is the one that Paz was held in, and now it's all kind of swapped around. If you go back to Lamar Khaate Palace, and I've said that was kind of linked to the hospital, the changing thing happening with the hospital there. I think it kind of is further reinforced with all the story stuff that happens in the hospital in Mission 0 and again in 46. It all kind of ties itself together to me that way. And that's why the medical platform, I think it's so weird like that, right? That's why all these platforms seem shaped so weirdly and kind of seemingly impractically. It's because they're trying to make these story connections, kind of symbolic story connections. So the next one to get to is the support platform, which is like Yakhoo Oboo. If you look at it on the map, it's got a big old exclamation mark on it. And I've said before, the support platform kind of has some hidden links to the R&D platform, and how if you go down into the support platform's basement, there's a hydroponics farm. And what are they growing down there? They're cloning plants. So the cloning plants thing relates to cloning these super soldiers, like the snake clones. Excuse me. It relates to the parasite research and everything that's been going on here. And if you go back to Yakhoo Oboo and you go back to the mission that takes place there, Angel with Broken Wings especially is the big one. There's a lot going on, like I've said in my lectures, with, kind of the hidden Chico stuff is going on there. There's a lot of evidence of torture that went on there and things like that. And the support platform on our base is also another place that's filled with a lot of boxes. So that kind of gives it some of a link to the base dev platform. And just to move on, the R&D platform, like I've said, it's related to Shago Village, where there are farms in Afghanistan. There's no farms at Yakhoo Oboo, but there is the river there at Yakhoo Oboo. Now, I also mentioned earlier, I think that was in mission 28, the river in Code Talker's mission being kind of the River of Sorrow, and it going right by Yakhoo Oboo and all the torture happening there and all the hidden story stuff happening there. That's all linking together again. And so the R&D village, you could think of like the waters as coming from Yakhoo Oboo, which is, it's actually north of Shago Village. And so Shago Village, you could think of those farms are being watered by the water that's coming from Yakhoo Oboo and further up in the mountains. And so that kind of links those two on the map. And so the R&D and support platforms being linked and having this kind of farming, cloning, research kind of and development stuff. And with Sahelanthropus itself being the thing that's kind of being developed, and Sahelanthropus being a big symbol for the next generation super soldier, that is Fox and all that kind of stuff. It all kind of ties itself in together. And the R&D platform, to further elaborate on this, is shaped like a box in a box. It's not just one big box. It's sort of like a box in a box. Like there's this smaller cell box that's empty. It has Sahelanthropus or the AI pod in it, depending on where you are in the game. But it's like that empty box there is kind of like one box. And then the rest of the big platform is like another box. So you've got this box in a box context. And that's kind of like this, Turtles all the way down, kind of self-referential stuff is kind of tied in with all of that. And with it being named Shago Village, Shago Hide is also another self-reference. So there's all that. The last platform to talk about is the quarantine platform, which is Spugmay Keep. And we know Spugmay Keep is a big ruined, place. But Spugmay Keep has got some links to Abe Shifap ruins, and I've said that Abe Shifap is kind of symbolic of the entirety of the base being ruined. And you can also go back and, like I've said, how Ghwandei kind of has this ruined kind of context to it. A lot of these other outposts have kind of a ruined context. Sakurai Village is another one, even though I'm not mentioning it here, because Sakurai Village stands for a part of Camp Omega. But the quarantine platform is another one of those deltas. It's triangle shaped, but it's rotated, you could say, if you look at it kind of from the same orientation where you land on both platforms. It's like the delta for the medical platform is facing northwest, and then the delta for the quarantine platform is facing true north. That's kind of how I look at them. And there's changes that happen in both of those places in the story. There's kind of a smaller change, you could say, that happens on the medical platform that really is supposed to come before the quarantine platform that you get. Really, that's Mission 43, right? That's supposed to be the big transformative moment in this game. And, I mean, it really is in the narrative, but not all players connected to it, so that's why I say it's supposed to be. So that's really it for the main parts of the base and all the parallels and stuff like that. There's more to it, obviously, but I've gone over the more to it stuff in the past lectures. if you want to have a more detailed view into all of this and you haven't watched the other lectures, go back and watch them. So moving on, there's other structures to talk about and other details to talk about. The first other detail I want to talk about is how each of the different platforms has a pairing of different resources that you need to build it. And also, kind of on the flip side of that, when you invade certain platforms in FOB mode, you get specific rewards that are increased from certain platforms. And I'm not going to go into all of it here, but like just for example, you get like fuel and common metal, or you get like biological material and common metal needed, or you get like fuel and minor metal. Just to go over it real quick, there's a number of different resources in this game that you need to build stuff. There's biological material, there's fuel, there's common metal, there's minor metal, and then there's precious metal. Now you never need to use the precious metal to actually build any of the platforms. Precious metal is only used, I think, in developing your equipment and stuff like that. But the other four are used in all of the platform building stuff. And fuel is by far like your most needed one, but common metal is also needed a lot. It's needed for 2 of them, or maybe 3 of them, I think it is, or something like that. But each of them being specifically a combination of 2 different resources gets back to how the original formula for Chico was this kind of 2 different pairings of parasites, right? And how on Mission 12 in Hellbound, inside Chico's head on that big platform after Skullface leaves and everything, there's these 3 red boxes up there. One of them is fuel, one of them is, I think it's minor metal, and one of them is precious metal. It's just another hint towards sort of the formula, right? The metal being like the archaea, the other metal, I think it's common metal actually. That's the archaea, and then the precious metal being like diamonds is the hint towards the diamond in his chest. And then the fuel is kind of like the fire, really the nuclear fuel in this case, because it's like I said, it's nuclear not as in like it's a nuclear fusion or fission reaction. It's nuclear as in it's manipulating the atomic level from the quantum level kind of thing going on. So you can go look at all of the resources yourself and kind of tie them to the different platforms and kind of get a little bit of story stuff from that, from what all I've kind of given you there. I don't want to go into it too much because it's kind of fun to figure out. But like I said, from invading the FOBs, and also the FOB event rewards to kind of you get certain rewards from those things. And you can kind of think of those materials symbolically as tied to the story stuff that goes on these platforms. I really don't like the multiplayer stuff in this game. The FOB stuff is terrible, but the FOB events, which are pretty much single player, are pretty fun. They can get kind of tough, but if you're okay with killing, they can be kind of fun. Another thing I wrote down here about the farms that I want to go back to, I did mention that there's cloning going on in the farms, but if you go look at the physical structure of those farms in the basement of the support platform, and this is also present in the animal conservation platform, which I'll get to here in a little bit. These, let's say, plant clusters are shaped, they're divvied out in these sets of 4. It's in like a big kind of square area, and it's kind of sectioned off with this kind of 4-segment kind of thing going on. It looks kind of like a Punnett square, actually. If you know anything about genetics, a Punnett square is where you take 2 genotypes. You take the say the mother's donation and the father's donation, and you pair them up in a square where you get 4 different combinations of both alleles of each gene, because each gene is made up of 2 alleles. And each of those alleles combines with one of the other parents' alleles, and so you get 4 different combinations. And that's how, just kind of on a basic level, how genetics works. And these farms kind of look like Punnett squares on the ground there. It's not really ground, on the floor there. And if you look, there's also kind of the plants that are being grown are kind of similar in some squares and different in other squares. And I think this, and because there's 4 different kind of sets of these squares that are being grown, kind of implies that there's these 4 different snakes. And actually, 3 of the 4 farms have complete 4 segments of the little squares. The 4th farm only has 3 of them, and the 4th square is kind of like clipped off by the door. which is kind of interesting. But you could get back to that, how the stuff I said about how there's like this solidus is kind of similar. So there's solid snake, liquid snake, solidus snake, and then there's this kind of fourth one. You could kind of put fox in that place, but you could also kind of put vamp in that place. You can kind of do like a 3 and 4 kind of deal going on with a lot of the different snakes, because they're not all really comparable directly, but some groups of them are, and some groups of them are kind of more different, or some of the individuals are. I've always said, Solidus is a little more likened to Vamp, and Solidus is a little more likened to Fox than he is to Solid or Liquid. But Liquid is also likened quite a bit to specifically a lot of Chico stuff. But that's stuff I've gone over already, and it kind of, I think, again, relates back to why the farms look like these cells. And again, it's located in the basement of the support platform in the bottom, which is, it's more pit references, right? Like the pit that Paz is kept in Ground Zeroes is kind of like this farm. It's like it's expanded. It's a lot bigger, kind of implying the stuff they were doing with Paz down in that pit is what they're doing down here in the basement of the support platform. Hydroponics. Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny. But that also, the oily water separation sequence, and water being key to that whole thing, and water being key to farming, and the water how I talked about the river going next to Yakhoo Oboo, and it being the river of sorrow. The waters are kind of like the memories, actually, in a lot of ways, kind of like the past events. It's not really the events themselves; it's really more like the memories of the past events. But anyways, moving on. The next thing to talk about is the Animal Conservation Platform. I love this place. If you haven't been to the Animal Conservation Platform and paid attention, you're gonna want to go do that. Hopefully, after I go over this. Now, the Animal Conservation Platform, kind of like those farms I was talking about, are split. It's split into 4 areas. It's kind of trilobal, is what I wrote down. There's these 3 arms, and there's a 4th area kind of on the center of the kind of the hub. And it's interesting because the 3 lobes that are the farms that are out on the arms are all home to ground-dwelling animals. And then the one in the middle is home to avians. There's a big old bird cage there in the middle. So let's talk about the bird cage first, because I've talked about how, venom is kind of the thing that's in the air now, and how words are passed through the air. Well, this bird cage is like a giant version of Chico's cell. It basically is Chico's cell. There's a large, ruined kind of tree stump-like thing, or tree leg that you could say is there, or tree trunk. It looks like a giant foot. Looks like a leg and a big foot. Kind of like the giant monkey Chico that I was talking about. It kind of implies that maybe he lost his leg in that battle. Maybe that was how they finally got him to stop going crazy. But the leg could be symbolic. It might not be a literal leg. Given everything that we've seen here is symbolic, I would think that it's probably not a literal leg. It's, well, what's a symbolic third leg, right? We all know that, right? I don't need to go into that too much, I hope. But that's kind of what's going on here, is this bird cage is kind of another version of Chico's cell, but it's big. And that goes back to how I've theorized how he's kind of he's made into a large monkey version of himself, kind of a devolved version of himself. And the birds being kind of related to dinosaurs, and kind of aves being kind of more closely linked to our sort of evolutionary past. I think kind of ties in with all of that. And I also want to note here, if you go to this strut and you just listen, you won't hear nothing. It's just silence there. You don't get any radio calls. None of your buddies can come with you to the animal conservation. You can't bring Dee Dee to the Animal Conservation Platform, which I'm like, first time I noticed that, I was like, I want to bring Dee Dee to come see all the animals and stuff, but no, you're not allowed, because they want to enforce the silence there. They want to enforce the kind of serenity there, let's say. They want to be able to leave you a place to think somewhere. And you're supposed to really go to this animal conservation platform and have a good think about all of this stuff. That's really why it's so quiet and why the birds are right there in the middle, and the other three groupings of animals are kind of off to the side. And you can think about those too, and they're fun, but the main one you're supposed to think about is this one right here in the middle with all the birds and stuff. And it's interesting too. You can get a tape, for the bird calls, and it's not like entirely obvious what that tape's useful for. I'm pretty sure the bird call tape can be used to if a guard's checking the area where you've just like made a noise and you want him to get out of there. I think you can play the tape with the speaker on, and it should maybe like send the guard on his way, satisfy his curiosity. I haven't tested that myself though, so I'm not sure. But I do find it interesting you can find these tapes here. The tape being in the cell, I think, is another reference to how back in Ground Zeroes you could find the Ground Zeroes music tape in what was Paz's cell, and how I've talked about how what's in the cell is kind of a self-reference. And you could think of that tape as also being linked to kind of the Peace Walker tape that you find at the top of the tower, the Skullface mission, and so on and so forth. So the last thing I want to mention about this animal conservation platform is why did they make this in the game at all? I think we wouldn't have missed it if they had just left out the animal stuff, right? Well, there's a character in the game who's quite interested in animals and cryptids, specifically in Peace Walker. That's Chico. His whole cryptid deal leads to a whole bunch of stuff in Peace Walker. His curiosity about wanting to go out and see animals and stuff, it actually plays directly into the main story events and stuff like that. So it's all related. The Chico stuff, it's not like obvious there. It's not given to you. It's not really prevalent. It's hiding in plain sight, just like everything else in this game. Okay, so the last thing I want to get to is kind of a more of a higher order way of thinking of these, all these main strut elements on your mother bases. The ones that can be like directly linked. How I was talking about how, for example, the R&D and support platforms can be linked, and how that kind of links the boxes and the farms. Like I was saying, the farms kind of are linked via this water context and the river stuff, and the boxes and the support and the torture, waterboarding and all of that. The boxes at Yakhoo, Oboo, supply outpost everywhere. It all kind of ties together that there was, sort of like trauma is the sort of like the stuff that makes you grow in a way. It's not really saying that. It's like in the case of this character, right? It's Fox's youth while he was growing was just filled with a lot of trauma and stuff, and that was probably true of Naked Snake as well, and probably of Ocelot. And the R&D and support platforms being linked is kind of a big hint towards that. So that also links those activities at those platforms back to Camp Omega. We know that's really where that stuff kind of originated. And Camp Omega was, we think it's in Cuba, right? And when we play Ground Zeroes, and as I've gone over, it probably wasn't in Cuba. It was probably in Colombia on the land base that was Outer Heaven. And MSF was the offshore base, which was really part of Outer Heaven, but it was like they had changed the name to give it cover. And it wasn't really MSF. It was like they had stolen that MSF name and put it over their arm of Outer Heaven. And they just called it MSF. But it's really Outer Heaven. And that's where all the war crimes and torture and bad stuff was going on. That's also tied directly to Shadow Moses, the rebellion, and all that stuff that happens there. All of the torture that happens there in Shadow Moses is, in my mind, directly linked to all of this stuff that's I've been talking about with the waterboarding and all that. Obviously, they switched from waterboarding to electrical stuff, but maybe you could say they switched back to it because we see the electrical stuff in Portable Ops. Cunningham uses the electrical poles to torture somebody in that game, and it's ineffective. And then they bring out the waterboarding stuff. We don't see it. It's cut. It's there in Ground Zeroes. But then they go back to the electrical stuff in the Phantom Pain because that's how Quiet is tortured. They also use other stuff, but it's not really like direct torture methods. They use like intimidation. Ocelot's really good. He doesn't so much have to torture his subjects as much as he has to like show them what he's gonna do and make them believe that he's gonna do it, which is really effective. But anyways, so that's R&D and support kind of boxes and farms being linked. And so if the boxes and farms are linked, that also ties in with the base dev platform. The base dev is kind of tied in with the R&D and the support. And, we rescue Kaz from Ghwandei, and he's kind of been tortured. When we see him, that's when we kind of realize the torture. And so that kind of links the base dev platform a little bit to this stuff. And then again, going back to how I said that in the Ground Zeroes video that we see, that's probably the base dev platform that's being landed on, or the Peace Walker equivalent of the base dev platform. So that's enough about the base dev and R&D and support kind of link. Let's go on to the next big link to me is the support platform and the medical platform. Both of these have pits in them. And that kind of links them both to the Ground Zeroes kind of context of where Paz is kept in that cell. And that also kind of links them to Mfinda oil field. Here I am forgetting there's so many places to remember. But there's a lot of superimpositions to make from all these connections. And that's kind of what this part's for. So the support platform, the medical platform, Mfinda oil field, all of the pit context that you get in the game. You can kind of link in Kaziba Camp a little bit there too. This is kind of like the torture room in Shadow Moses. It's also kind of like the torture room in Metal Gear Solid 2 at the depths below the big shell, kind of in Arsenal. All of these places are kind of linked together. And the support platform, again, it being linked to you don't want to include the R&D and the base dev link here, but since the support link or the support platform is here with this kind of set of links, you can kind of link this set of things with the other set of things, if that makes sense. And that's kind of how this works. There's like a set of things that kind of go together, and then a whole other separate set of things that go together, and there's one thing in common between those two sets, and you kind of have to line them up and kind of stack them all in your head. And that's how you get this hidden story stuff. So going back again to the command and combat platform being kind of towers, and the base dev platform is like another tower. And again, the base dev platform links it again to the support platform, the R&D, and then that links all of that back to the medical. And so you can see there's kind of a story flow that's established here through all of these settings being symbolically linked. And that's kind of the idea here. So then we can also link the medical platform via its kind of delta shape with the quarantine platform and its delta shape, and also the animal conservation platform, because its trilobal shape, if you kind of just put walls between those two or those three lobes, you'd get another triangle. There's triangle kind of context and delta stuff here in the Phantom Pain that's been here the whole time. I'm not just like calling it delta because Metal Gear Solid Delta was announced, y'all. I mean, like, these are triangles. What else are you going to call it? A triangle that relates to change, that's delta. There's not really any other way to cut that mustard, if you ask me. So the medical platform also, again, that ties it back to the support platform and the base dev and all this other stuff. And then finally, the last little link that you can make is kind of between all of the boxes themselves, which I've already kind of gone over, but it's the base dev and the R&D platform, and also the Intel platform, because it's got the head in the box kind of context. So, and that, again, links back to the big shell, and links back to stuff at Shadow Moses, and stuff at Camp Omega, and stuff at other games, too. Even in Grozny Grad, and it's not as prominent there, but it's kind of there. Grozny Grad's kind of box shaped, And so, I know that's kind of a quick little kind of way to skim over how all these equivalencies are here, but I just kind of wanted to get that idea kind of in your mind that these different settings are linked symbolically so that you can connect those symbolic links to other symbolic links. It's kind of like making a chain, right? And making that chain is kind of the process of how you go through this game. And so going to any one setting in the game and kind of observing it and just being like, well, how is it physically, structurally related to anything else? And kind of taking that stuff and then being like, well, how is this related narratively to other stuff? And what else happens in the game here? You can kind of take all those things and combine them together in your mind, and you come up with all this hidden story stuff. And so, with all that said, that's about all I wanted to say about the architecture of Mother Base and the architecture of stuff in this game. I didn't go over Africa as much here because this, Mother Base as we see it more closely resembles Afghanistan. And as I've said, the Mother Base from Peace Walk, or really the Outer Heaven land base, is probably what's more represented with the Africa map, and that's just a whole nother lecture. And that's also, that's a lot of missing information too. I may do one on that one later in this whole little extra set. But I'm going to stop there for now on this one. The next lecture 25 will be about quiet. It's titled "Why Is Quiet?" And I'll do that one probably either during this week or next week. I was planning on starting these last weekend, but just work is kind of crazy, and holiday seasons and all that kind of stuff. I don't have as many hours of light during the day, and I have to film this with natural light because that's when it looks best. So I'm trying to get these done during the day, and I'm trying not to hurry up. I've only written the notes for these first 2 lectures. I've got to do notes for the other ones that I want to do. So I'm going to take my time on these. They're not going to be coming out super quick like the last set did. But with all that said, I hope you've enjoyed this lecture on the architecture of Mother Base and recapping all the stuff that I've been doing in the meantime. And, stick around. I've got more videos coming in the future, more lectures coming. Sorry for keeping y'all waiting for so long. Hope you've enjoyed. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.